She told me my military uniform would ruin her aesthetic and embarrass her in front of her high society in-laws, so she uninvited me to her wedding. 3 days later, her name popped up on my phone with a text that read, "We need $4,500 for our Bali honeymoon by tonight." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply transferred $10 with a single note. "Congratulations." Then I called a locksmith and changed every single lock on the 4-bedroom house she thought was her safety net. They thought I was just the quiet stepmother who paid the bills and swallowed her pride. What my stepdaughter didn't know, and what her brand new husband was about to learn the hard way, was that the house, her car, and the very funds funding her lavish lifestyle were held under a military trust they had no right to touch. Make sure to follow my story until the very end, and comment below which city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Victoria Mitchell. At 48 years old, after spending 20 years serving as a major in the U.S. Army, I thought I'd seen every form of disrespect human nature had to offer. I was wrong. The sharpest blow didn't come on a dusty deployment thousands of miles away. It came in my own kitchen, delivered by my 24-year-old stepdaughter, Chloe. She stood across from me, sipping iced coffee, and delivered the blow with a terrifying level of calm. "Victoria, we've decided it's best if you don't attend the wedding," she said. She explained that her fiancé's family came from high society circles, and an aesthetic, formal event just wouldn't fit with a stepmother who brought military rigidity to the room. She even claimed my dress uniform would embarrass her in front of her new in-laws. I turned to my husband, Mark, expecting him to step in, to defend the woman who had helped keep this family grounded for 7 years. Instead, he stared at his shoes, muttering something about wanting to keep the peace for Chloe's big day. Right then, isolated in the very home I worked so hard to build, I realized they saw me as nothing more than a quiet background presence who paid the bills and swallowed her pride. But they severely miscalculated who they were dealing with. To truly understand the depth of this betrayal, you have to understand the last 7 years. When I married Mark, I didn't just step into his life, I stepped up for his daughter. When Chloe wanted to go to an out-of-state university that Mark's budget couldn't touch, it was my military savings and monthly income that wrote the tuition checks. When she wanted a reliable car to drive to her first job interviews, I handed her the keys to a late-model SUV, taking on the monthly payments and insurance myself without asking for a dime in return. I gave her a completely rent-free room in my home so she could save money, quietly funding her lifestyle from behind the scenes while demanding nothing more than basic respect. But entitlement is a subtle poison. The more you give, the more people believe they are owed. On the day of the wedding, the silence in the house was deafening. I sat alone in my quiet living room while the sun dipped below the horizon, watching the clock tick past the hour she was supposed to walk down the aisle. Scrolling through social media, I watched distant live streams and polished photos pop up on my feed. A fairy tale high society ceremony featuring lavish floral displays, a 5-tier cake, and a beaming bride. A wedding I had bankrolled behind the curtain, while being explicitly banned from walking through the front door. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, wearing a simple sweater instead of the formal uniform I had earned through 2 decades of service. They thought my silence meant compliance. They thought I would swallow my hurt like I always did. They had no idea that as the last wedding picture was posted, my patience had officially run out. 3 days after the wedding, my phone chimed on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, expecting a delayed message of regret, or perhaps a lukewarm attempt at an apology. Instead, it was a text from Chloe, sent with the casual entitlement of someone who believed the world revolved around her. "Hey Victoria, we went a little over budget on the reception venue and the bar tab. We need $4,500 for our Bali honeymoon by tonight, so we can finalize the resort booking. Send it over ASAP. I stared at the screen, a cold wave of realization washing over me. There was no thank you for the years of support. No mention of her wedding day. No acknowledgement of the deliberate humiliation she had inflicted. She genuinely assumed I would fall into line, cut the check out of maternal duty, or a desperate attempt to buy my way back into her good graces. In her mind, I wasn't her stepmother. I was an open wallet with military precision. I didn't call her. I didn't send a furious paragraph detailing my anger. I opened my banking app, typed in her transfer handle, and sent over exactly $10. In the memo line, I typed one single word: congratulations. It wasn't a contribution, it was a clear, unmistakable declaration of war. My days of funding her luxury at the expense of my own dignity were officially over. Within 20 minutes of sending that $10 text, the phone started ringing off the hook. First Chloe, then Mark, then a sequence of panicked messages. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I made a very different phone call to a local locksmith. By mid-afternoon, a work van was parked in my driveway. Every lock on the 4-bedroom house was removed and replaced with high-security electronic keypads. I watched from the porch as the technician finished the job, handing me the master access cards. This wasn't just a house. It was a property I had purchased years before marrying Mark, held strictly under my personal military trust. Legal title, maintenance, taxes. Everything was in my name alone. Next, I opened my laptop and went to work on the finances. I revoked Chloe's user status on my primary rewards card, canceled the joint secondary account I had opened for her emergency expenses, and notified the insurance company that the late-model SUV she was driving would no longer be covered under my umbrella policy as of the end of the week. For 7 years, I had built a fortress of security around a girl who tossed me aside the moment she thought she'd stepped into higher society. Now, I was pulling back every brick. I walked through the quiet house, set the new security alarm, and sat down with a cup of tea. They thought I was a quiet background presence. They were about to learn what happens when the foundation decides to stop holding up the house. At 6 p.m., the silence was broken by the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. I looked out the front window to see Chloe's SUV pulling up, followed closely by her new husband Julian in his sleek sports car. They had come to grab Chloe's remaining luggage and, no doubt, demand an explanation for the $10 text. I watched as Chloe marched up the front steps, jammed her key into the deadbolt, and froze when it wouldn't even turn. She tried her code on the new electronic keypad. The red light flashed and beeped in refusal. Julian joined her, rattling the brass handle with growing frustration. I opened the front door, standing firmly on the threshold behind the locked screen door. "What is the meaning of this, Victoria?" Julian barked, stepping forward with the pompous authority of a man used to getting his way. "We have a flight to catch tomorrow, and Chloe needs her things. Unlock this door right now." "You don't command me in my own home, Julian," I said, my voice steady and measured. Mark emerged from his car behind them, looking flustered as he tried to intervene. "Victoria, please, just let them in. We can talk about the honeymoon money calmly." "There is no money, Mark. And there is no entry," I replied cleanly. "This house is held entirely under my private military trust. Chloe chose to exclude me from her life 3 days ago, claiming I didn't fit her high society standard. That choice comes with boundaries. You no longer have access to my property." The color drained from Julian's face as he looked from me to Chloe, whose confident posture was completely collapsing. "What does she mean, private trust?" Julian asked, turning to his new bride. "You told me this was your family estate." "She didn't tell you the whole truth, did she, Julian?" I said, stepping down onto the porch steps. "Chloe didn't come from money. She came from my sacrifice. The college degree she boasts about? Paid off by my military service benefits. The lifestyle she maintains? bankrolled by the stepmother she was too embarrassed to host at her wedding because of a uniform. Julian stood frozen, the reality of his high society illusion shattering in real time. He had married a woman under the impression that her family possessed vast wealth, only to discover that every luxury had been quietly subsidized by the very woman Chloe had humiliated and cast aside. "And as for that SUV in the driveway," I continued, pulling a folded legal notice from my coat pocket and handing it directly to Julian. "That vehicle is registered under my name and funded through my account. The policy expires at midnight, and the surrender notice requires the keys by Friday unless you assume the loan yourself. I suggest you use that $4,500 honeymoon budget to cover her car payment instead." Chloe began to cry, but there were no apologetic words, only the tears of someone whose carefully constructed mask had just been ripped away in front of her new husband. Julian stared at the document in his hands, completely speechless as the foundation of their new marriage hit its very first catastrophic shockwave. Mark stood on the driveway, caught between the reality of his daughter's greed and the firm boundary I had finally drawn. For the first time, he saw that enabling Chloe had cost him the respect of his home. I made it clear, if he wanted to stay in this marriage, the passive silence was over, and the entitlement ended today. Julian quietly took the car keys from Chloe, loaded her remaining bags into his own trunk, and drove away without another word. The high society fairy tale was over, replaced by the real work of adulthood they had tried so hard to avoid. In the months that followed, peace returned to my home. The high security locks were a daily reminder that self-respect is non-negotiable. I reclaimed my space, turning my house back into a sanctuary built on strength, service, and dignity. I gave everything to a stepdaughter who threw me away for an aesthetic. But in holding my ground, I gained something far more valuable: my own pride. What would you have done if you received that $4,500 text after being uninvited? Would you have transferred the $10 or handled it differently? Comment below with your thoughts and the city you're watching from.